I'm a little embarrassed that I can't deliver this talk to you in Irish, but I just want to acknowledge that if it wasn't for the start that we got in the Gaelscoil O'Dora in Newcastle West in 2009, I wouldn't be here to give you this talk at all, because it was Dr. Dahi O'Moroku, the principal there at the time, who invited us to introduce the technology of virtual worlds into the school. And Éireann mentioned the use of game-based learning, so that was what we used that for in 2009. It was like, if you like, virtual reality without the specs, but it's the same kind of technology. So just acknowledge that. I have in my hand here a book called Disclosure, written by Michael Crichton, same guy who wrote Jurassic Park and a lot of other well-known techno-thrillers. And I got this book in '94 because I read a review in a magazine, a computer magazine, that didn't really talk a whole lot about the plot of the book, or the plot of the book, but it did speak breathlessly about the underlying technology theme of virtual reality. And that was my first time coming across that term, virtual reality. Even though I was familiar with the idea from a program that I was obsessed with, Star Trek, The Next Generation, and the holodeck, and the idea that you could use technology to transport yourself in space and time without necessarily going anywhere physically. That was a fascinating idea to me. So if you just indulge me for a moment, I'm going to read to you a short passage from the book, which of course was invariably made into a movie, as most Michael Crichton books were. That's Donald Sutherland and Demi Moore there in the background, and Michael Douglas was also a star. But just look at what that guy is wearing there and what he's standing in. I'm going to read you a short passage from page 350. So the lights flicked on. It doesn't correspond exactly to the image that you see there, by the way. The lights flicked on one after another in long banks. Fernandez stared at the room. What is this, the exercise room from hell? It's a virtual reality simulator, Sanders said. She looked at the round walker pads and all the wires, the cables hanging from the ceiling. The headset has two small screens. They project images in front of your eyes. Put it on and be careful. These things are expensive. How expensive? $250,000 a piece. The end. And it kind of was the end in a sense, because this technology had been touted as being around the corner for a long time, but it was just so expensive that it didn't happen really for another 20 years. And it's not that Michael Crichton invented virtual reality. It had been in the lab for quite a time up to that, of course. But it took us 20 years to go from there to there, and just look at how remarkably similar it is. This is a real virtual reality headset that you can now buy called the Oculus Rift. And he's standing in a real omnidirectional treadmill called the Virtuix Omni that you can now buy as well. So you can walk in any direction and stay in the one spot. So why did it take us 20 years to get there, besides the $250,000? Well, this guy provides the answer, really. He was 19 years old in 2012 when he recognized that most of the sensors required to make virtual reality were actually in the smartphone. If you like, a peace dividend of the smartphone wars was that the precision of the sensors and the cost had been driven down, the quality had been driven up to the degree that you could now use most of the electronics in a smartphone to make a virtual reality headset at long last. So he ran a Kickstarter campaign, crowdfunding, and raised a phenomenal $2.5 million nearly. And shortly after that, he got an investment of $75 million from a very influential venture capital firm in Silicon Valley called Andreessen Horowitz. And the Andreessen of Andreessen Horowitz was Mark Andreessen, the guy that created the first web browser called Mosaic. What he said was, we believe Oculus will not only alter the gaming landscape, but will redefine fundamental human experiences in areas like film, education, architecture, and design. The important thing to note there is that gaming is kind of an afterthought. Certainly gaming is going to be the area where this technology will be used initially, because the pro gamers are the guys that spend 2,000 quid to buy the PCs to run this stuff. But in the long term, there's going to be so much more interesting uses in areas like film, education, architecture, and design, and so on. So Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook decided shortly after that to spend $2 billion buying the company Oculus. So it was a nice payday for young Palmer Luckey. Lucky indeed, huh? And Zuckerberg said at the time, mobile is the platform of today, but we're now also getting ready for the platforms of tomorrow. So if you like, the PC was the computing platform of the 90s, or sorry, of the 80s. The web and the internet were the platform, was the real computing platform of the 90s. The smartphone was the platform of the noughties, and really this is going to be the next big computing platform, these guys believe. Importantly to note for anyone that's interested in language, it's not so much about the visuals. Zuckerberg says it's really a new communication platform. It's a completely new way of sharing ideas and thoughts with each other. The incredible thing about the technology is that you feel like you're actually present in another place. So one of the hard things when you're talking about this technology is unless you've got a chance to try it, it's very hard to really understand it, to really get it. When you put on a virtual reality headset, you actually do feel transformed mentally into another place. So a more proper definition, if you like, there, VR is short for virtual reality. But that's the key word there, presence. I've underlined presence because it's all about feeling as if you are actually in a different place. And if you don't really feel transformed, it's probably not virtual reality. You might think that means that you need to have a photorealistic environment. But that's not actually the case. You know, if you're in the dark or the lights have gone out and you can kind of only see, you can't really see textures or colors, you can see outlines, but you still completely feel like you're in a real place, right? So there's a very popular virtual reality game called Job Simulator, and it's deliberately cartoonish looking. But when you put on that headset and you hold the two controllers in your hands and you see your grey hands there in front of you in the environment, and it's just a fun little game where you take the frying pan and you do a bit of cooking. I guess he's flipping the tomato there, isn't he? But what the makers have seen is that invariably what happens as people stop playing this after 10 or 15 minutes, they want to take off the headset, right? So they go to put down the controllers that they're holding in their hands. And they leave the controllers down on the virtual counter. And they hit the floor because they've been fooled. So their mind has crossed this physiological threshold where they actually forget that that's not real. And that's the key importance there. So Oculus isn't going to have this market to themselves. Sony are going to be making another high-end headset. So is HTC. In the mid-range then is you take the likes of a Samsung Note phone and you put it into a Samsung Gear VR headset. So there's some electronics in the actual headset that just make it a bit better than this one, which is called Google Cardboard. A lot of people thought this was a joke when it came out initially, but it's real. I've got one of these that came in an envelope. You take it out of the envelope, you fold it up, you stick it with the Velcro, and you stick in your phone. And it's a cheap and cheerful way of experiencing virtual reality. It's not as maybe it's not real presence, but it's still a nice way of kind of getting what it's like. And it's a very accessible way and a very affordable way, so much so that the likes of McDonald's now are experimenting in Sweden with giving these away as part of the actual packaging of the Happy Meal. You finish your Happy Meal, you finish your chips, you take the box and you wrap it up and you make a headset for yourself. The New York Times did a big giveaway of these cardboard headsets before Christmas so that people could experience their documentaries, their 360-degree documentaries as well. So like any new big computing platform, you're going to have a lot of other peripherals playing into that. So maybe the visuals and the audio take you 85 or 90% of the way in terms of believing that you're in another place. But if you're using a joypad or a joystick to move yourself around, you're never going to fully fool yourself. Whereas a virtual reality treadmill helps you to get that bit further. Then you're going to have various controllers. This guy doesn't just have the controllers in his hands, he has a sensor on his torso and 2 sensors on his legs. And essentially he can do full digital puppeteering in the virtual reality. So that's not just for his own sake to see his own body fully in there, but that other people, in terms of social virtual reality, can now see him in there as well, like the holodeck in Star Trek. This guy is Glenn Keane. He's a kind of a legend in terms of animation at Disney. Created a lot of their well-known characters. I'm going to just show you a video that he did.
I would draw not to do a drawing, but so that I could step in and live in that world. Today, all the rules have changed. by putting tools in your hand that can create in virtual reality. I can put goggles on and I just step into the paper and now I'm drawing in it. North, south, east, west, all directions are open now. Just immersing myself in space is more like a dance. What is this amazing new world I just stepped into? When I draw in virtual reality, I draw all the characters real life size. They are that size in my imagination. The character can turn. Ariel is actually turning in space. And even if you take the goggles off, I'm still remembering she's right there. It's real. That doorway to the imagination is open a little wider. The edges of the paper are no longer there. This is not a flat drawing. This is sculptural drawing. Making art in three-dimensional space is an entirely new way of thinking for any artist. What does this mean for storytelling? I love the idea as an animator that you can be anything that you can imagine. And as a kid, you're completely free. The soul of any kind of a creative art form is the freedom.
Can you imagine if there was a bunch of kids anywhere in the world put on their virtual reality headset and they essentially feel like they're sitting in the same room there with Glenn Keane as he's drawing that amazing three-dimensional drawing. It opens a whole new world of possibilities. If you think of all the software that we use to share thoughts and ideas with each other in terms of whiteboards and graphics applications, but it's all 2D, it's flat. It's so hard to express yourself in 3D, or in 2D, I should say. So that's one aspect of the content of virtual reality. The other side of the coin, if you like, is the visual photorealistic content that comes from cameras. So there's a lot of new cameras coming on the market like this that have any amount of lenses on them in a sphere that's taking visual information in 360 degrees, up and down, vertical and horizontal. You don't need all that many lenses actually. There's a Samsung camera that just has two lenses back to back, captures a full 360, but the more lenses you have, it tends to be the better the quality. Now you could argue that this isn't what you call virtual reality video, it's more 360 video. And the reason is because, of course, the camera was only in one position when it was taking the video. But if you move your head side to side or forward and back, the camera can correspond to that movement. When you have the headset on, let's say, the camera was only in a single position when it was recording, and therefore you break the illusion straight away. Whereas with the software you don't, because it can change what you're seeing to correspond to the movement of your head. So there's an argument to be made that that's not really virtual reality video, but true virtual reality video cameras are coming. They're going to be extremely expensive to start with. This is one called the Lightroom Merge. It's going to cost $300,000. So it's probably only going to be movie makers that are going to be using these for the next 10 years. But it's an incredible new technology called light field. So it's not a traditional way of taking a video. It's what it's actually doing is kind of capturing the rays of light falling into a full volume, a full cubic volume of 1 meter, let's say, which means that after the video is recorded, you can still move your head side to side, back and forth, and what you see will correspond to where your head would have been in reality. So when you get to that level of quality, it's going to be something like The Matrix, the movie. It's going to be hard to tell the difference between reality and virtual reality. So before I move on from the video side of stuff, just to note that last week the BBC announced that their first major virtual reality documentary is going to be actually about the Easter Rising, interestingly enough. So I'll give you an example then of some of the places that this stuff is actually being used. So Ford Motor Company have been using it for a few years with more expensive headsets, where a design engineer is sitting down in Dusseldorf, and another one, his colleague, is sitting down in Detroit, I think. But they both feel like they're sitting in the front seats of the car, talking about the design of the new dashboard, as if they were sitting there in reality. It was great to see just last week that Sherry Fitzgerald got a bit of publicity with this.
So I look after new residential developments. There's a lot of new construction taking place in Ireland at the moment, particularly in the Dublin area. And as we start off a new residential scheme, we want to give people an idea of what the finished product is going to be like. The Gear VR glasses are fantastic. We are able to bring people through the house before it's constructed. They can get a real feel for the size of the house, the shape, the layout of the rooms. They can walk from room to room, and this has been a huge benefit for us.
We first came across VR technology about 9 months ago, and we actually launched our first scheme where Rokeby Park in Lucan using the Samsung Gear VR. We worked up what an actual house could look like, and people experienced the VR walkthrough by putting on the headsets and essentially walking through the house. They're quite large houses with very generous floor-to-ceiling heights. So we really wanted to get that across in the VR experience. We had no show houses, we were only selling off plans. So to give someone a sense of what their bedroom, what their kitchen, what the aspect was like, was really useful for us.
So good to see those guys doing that. We were actually doing similar work ourselves with architects. We're allowing people to really feel as if they're in their new home before it's ever built, and get a sense of proportion and scale that you can't get by just looking on a monitor. There's going to be a lot of healthcare applications for virtual reality. We're talking to people ourselves about reminiscence therapy, for people with dementia, to kind of relive early life experiences, maybe rebuild their village or town from when they were young, so they can talk about it. There's a company in Sligo actually doing really interesting stuff in terms of mindfulness and meditation in virtual reality. Surgeons training, there's not a real body on the table there, but he feels like there is, looking through the headset. Dentists looking at them to help people with anxiety. And in fact, that's a big use of virtual reality in terms of exposure therapy. So it's exposing people in a very controlled manner to their phobias. They know in the back of their head somewhere that this isn't real, but it feels very, very real. And so they can increase the intensity of that. So the military have been using that idea for a long time to help soldiers to recover from post-traumatic stress disorder by recreating the environment where they suffered maybe a catastrophic injury and just putting them back into that environment in a very controlled manner. NASA looking at using this to control humanoid robots on other planets, for instance. So you feel like you're looking through the eyes of the robot to control it. A lot of sports teams are using it to prepare for scenarios on the sports field, to train. Training is a very strong application of virtual reality. We're actually talking to utility ourselves. We've built a prototype for health and safety training where there's a lot of situations that are too expensive, too dangerous, maybe too disruptive to train for those things in reality out in the field. And yet at the same time, if you train for them back in the classroom, you're not really training effectively. So the next best option is virtual reality, because there's a real kind of physicality, a choreography, an understanding of what your colleagues are doing around you in a space. You can't really do that in the classroom. Virtual reality shopping, I have to say I was kind of skeptical about until a Centra manager of the Centra in Inishannon in County Cork came to us and said he was very interested in the idea. And I was kind of saying, isn't it a lot easier just to click on a drop-down list on Amazon than to be putting on a headset to go shopping? So that is the actual shop in Inishannon that we've modelled. It's not a generic Centra shop. So the idea is that you'll have the one that's local to you. You'll recognise straight away where you go. And he said, we shop by memory, of course. We know where things are. We can close our eyes and remember where the butter is and where the milk is and so on. So it is probably a more intuitive way to shop than on the likes of Amazon. But he also said that the social aspect is very important to the likes of Centra. So Mary here, she wouldn't just put on her headset at 8 o'clock in the evening and go and get her biscuits. She'd probably meet her friend Sophie or whoever down in the shops as well. when she's getting her biscuits and have a chat with her as if she was there in person. You can see there's very intuitive hand gestures as well. You know, it's about bringing the body fully into the experience. So this was a real application that we made. It's not computer effects, and you could have a hand menu. It's much more intuitive than using buttons and so on. So this is some software that Oculus made themselves, and it's just to emphasize the social aspect again of virtual reality. It's not a lone experience. On the right-hand side, you see the reality. She's holding a controller in her hand. And on the left, you see what she sees through her headset. And her hands are represented by a blue outline, a kind of a ghostly blue outline. And her head, because the computer knows where her headset is and it knows where her controllers are, it can represent her hands and her head in the virtual reality. And really, that's enough. You know, we saw a picture earlier on of a full body avatar. You know this? But what studies show is that we actually move our heads and our hands in such a distinctive way that it's enough to recognize somebody in virtual reality just to see their hands and their heads often.
And then go like this.
And I want to go back there, I'm sorry, just to show you again the way he passed a ball. He's not even in the same room as her. He could be on the other side of the world, and yet they pass the ball to each other as naturally as if they were in the same room.
And then light the Roman candle.
So a lot of people prefer this to video conferencing even, because no matter how big the screen is or how high the quality of Skype or any video conferencing system is, you never feel like you're in the same room with that person. Whereas with virtual reality, you genuinely feel like you're there in the same space. A completely new way of communicating. And you see how natural all those gestures are, and how important the body language is. So, before I finish, I want to touch on augmented reality, because unfortunately there's a lot of terminology associated with this stuff, but don't worry too much about it. Augmented and virtual reality are like two sides of the same coin. They really exist on a spectrum like that. Really what it is virtual reality is everything that you see is coming from the computer. Augmented reality is when you're wearing a headset and you can see the real world in front of you, but the computer's projecting digital stuff onto that. So I could be looking down at the chair there and I could see a little character hopping across the chairs. That's really what augmented reality is. But they exist on a spectrum with each other, very closely related. I believe that within 5 or 6 years we'll wear a single headset and it'll just do all that stuff. So that's kind of more what it's like to visualize it. It's holograms essentially, and it's great to hear Microsoft are really using that terminology. They're not talking about augmented reality, it's all holograms with them. So this is the Microsoft HoloLens. It's their headset.
Microsoft HoloLens brings holograms into your real world. Using transparent lenses, spatial sound, and an understanding of your environment, holograms look and sound like they're actually part of the world around you. That is mixed reality. With Microsoft HoloLens, holograms are viewed through the holographic frame centered in the middle of your view. This preserves your peripheral vision, so you can move freely and connect and collaborate with people around you. Holograms in mixed reality don't...
So again, I think you can see incredible opportunities there for collaboration with people. And just to give you... Oh, sorry. Another video from Microsoft. And this is probably showing a more real-world scenario. This is on a construction site.
Visualizing design data in the context of the real environment is a much better way to make sure that the design is implemented.
She's actually on the construction site. She's wearing the headset. So she's seeing the reality of what's built so far, but she's also seeing the computer-aided design overlaid onto the construction site of what's coming down the line. So she walks over here to the wall.
Correctly on site.
The computer can project what this is going to look like in the next few days. And she sees immediately a problem where the doorway, actually there's a beam behind it, which is kind of a typical problem on a, miscommunication on a construction site. So she needs to consult now with her colleague back in the office.
Microsoft HoloLens allows you to collaborate with somebody regardless of distance, like they were there. Hello there.
That's his view back in the office. He can see her hologram beside him, and he can see exactly what she's looking at because of the gaze pointer there. And her headset has overlaid what she's seeing onto his office wall. So essentially it feels like the two of them are in the same space together.
There. Hello there.
Hey, Igor, where they're trying to put this door, there's a beam behind here.
I'm looking at this beam. We're interacting with it about a problem that we can see and being able to solve that problem with all the data that we need in front of us in real time.
That might seem like a kind of a trivial situation, but it's actually, if you think about all the communication that cuts out on by traditional means, let's say by phone calls and back and forth and pictures and video, and it's still the resolution might still not be going straight back into the computer, whereas when he makes this change here, that's being fed straight back into the computer. So I just want to show you one last video. Obviously those videos there are kind of conceptual videos from Microsoft. That's what it's going to look like to use the HoloLens next year or the year afterwards. But this final video here is from a company called Meta, which is a competitor to Microsoft in this space. And they came out last week with the Meta 2 headset. And this was, all the video that you see here was shot through, it was as if they took off the headset and just shot the video through the headset. So it's all real, this is all doable now. And what you see here at the start are 2 virtual monitors on this guy's desk. So this company already, they say that come back in a year's time and there will not be any monitor or screen on any desk. Every employee will be using augmented reality to project as many virtual monitors as they want to, and also what you'll see here in a second. So it's just like what he's seeing here is 2 virtual monitors, a web page, and his email. And he can interact with his hand, these holograms. So he brings back the screens here again. He can see just a kind of it looks like a web page with a car, a model of a car. Obviously it's in 2D and his web page. But look what he can do with the 2D car. You can just pull it off the screen onto the desk and it's turned into a 3D model. And now he can talk about this with his colleague who's wearing a headset and can see it from his own angle. And they can interact with this and modify it as if it was a real physical object. So again, if you think of powers that gives people to collaborate, in a way that would have been impossible or just really difficult by traditional means. So that's, as I say, that's doable now. It's not going to be maybe in the shops for another year, but it's on the way. So I know I've gone a bit long, but I hope I've given you a taste of at least the incredible potential of augmented and virtual reality, especially in terms of communication and collaboration. It's going to go way beyond video conferencing and so on. So that's how you can contact us. Thank you very much for listening to me.